Alison, Anitawaru ko Taranaki, tōku maunga, ko Ngāti, Ruanui, Rau Ngāruahine, Taranaki Wānui Oku Iwi. And I'm kind of in a little bit of a weird path to get here today. I started as a war crimes investigator. I went to law school in the 90s, just as all these UN tribunals were kicking off. And since then, I've realized that most of the real big conflicts are usually tied up to environmental issues and climate issues. So in the last 5 years or so, that's what my mahi has been focused on. Over to you. Who are you? Ko wai koe.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thank you, Alison. I'm Oliver Bruce. I'm from Rotorua originally, but now live here in Wellington. And I work as I'm a podcast host with something called Micromobility Industries, which I'll be talking about today. But I'm also an angel investor in climate change mitigation and adaptation technologies.
Kia ora koutou no Murihiku au. Anyone here from Murihiku? E noho ana o ki whanganui e Tara. I mahi ana o ki EECA, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. He kai whakahaere mātua te pūtia, te kōrero, ko Nicki Sutherland, taku ingoa. So I'm the GM of Investment and Engagement at EECA, which is one of New Zealand's agencies leading the decarbonisation challenge, hand in hand, I probably should say, with MFE, the Ministry for the Environment. Great to be here and really look forward to some questions.
Talofa lava, malo lele, kia orana. I'm not Cook-Island, but everyone keeps saying kia orana to me. Ia koe, no aia, whakalofa lahi atu. Hello o geta, I orana, aloha. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hi family, I'm Mary Moeono-Kolio. I'm Samoan, I'm a proud daughter of the Pacific, and I'm here to rep the Pacific Climate Warriors. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of my reckons and my thoughts. So mahalo.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko wainui tuku maunga, ko wainui tuku awa no Paikakara ki aho, ko Peter Handford tōku pāpā, ko Bridget Pidford tōku mama, ko Sophie Handford tōku ingoa, Moderator, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Now, I am not Vicky Robertson. She is unfortunately unwell, so about 30 minutes or so, I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to be a part of this amazing panel with incredibly inspiring people, so hopefully I'll be able to at least tautoko and add some thoughts from my perspective and experiences. So I helped to begin School Strike for Climate here in Aotearoa back in 2019, and following on from that as well, ran for council in Kapiti in the Paikakiri Hiromati ward and was elected onto council in 2019 as New Zealand's youngest elected member on a platform of climate justice and standing up, using my voice for our planet. Yeah. Kia ora.
Oh, awesome. So there you have it. We're your climate solutions team for today, together with all of you. So let's kick it off here in our first presentation, for which we're going to have a PowerPoint to go with it. So lead the way.
Excellent. Hey everyone. So this is me at 19, looking real scucks and very serious. That's me in the Bella Centre in Copenhagen at the 2009 UNFCCC COP, which is the big global negotiations for climate change. And behind me, but not in the picture, was Barack Obama and 76 other leaders who were trying to come to an agreement on what climate change was going to look like, or an agreement on climate change was going to look like. And we left there without a deal, really. There was a small deal, but it wasn't really a deal. And it made me devastated. Because I was like, look, we've got all these amazing people in the room. Surely we would be able to get some sort of agreement on this very monumental challenge of climate change. And that other picture is from, I was very lucky in 2012 to go along to the next meeting, or one of the next meetings in Qatar, in Doha. And I'm going to tell you, we were talking about the same things at about the same pace. It was glacial. we weren't getting any progress, and I left there feeling really devastated and working out, trying to like, what can I do? I care a lot about climate. Clearly, I'm not going to have any impact here at the international level. What can I do? And I took a lot of heart from this quote from Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change it, you build a new model and you make the old one obsolete. And so what I've tried to do in my life was to go and work in, it ended up being tech, but trying to build the solutions of what the next generation of things can be that we would end up making that old thing obsolete. So I went and worked for Uber. Now that sounds like a very weird thing. I was super into climate change. Why would I go work for a taxi company? But the idea was at the time that we need to work out how to get rid of car ownership. Cars are the biggest polluting source in New Zealand. They're the largest and fastest growing area of emissions. If we can work out how to provide a solution that isn't a car but gets you around, then maybe we would be able to reduce car use. And it was a great idea in 2015. That's what I thought, at least. And I was working on the team that was building the integrations between the first and last mile. So we go from if you hop off your Uber, you can hop onto the train, and we make the whole thing seamless. And hopefully, we'd be able to give you a subscription, and you wouldn't need to own a car. And I worked on that for a couple of years, but the big problem we had was that we were still really, at the end of the day, using cars. And cars, as you can see, are expensive. Most people in New Zealand own a car. We have one of the highest rates of car ownership in the world. And they're expensive to run. We spend, it's one of the most biggest areas of expense in the New Zealand household budget. But they're also really emitting. And I was sort of like, this doesn't quite feel like I'm kind of adding more cars to the road. We're somewhat shifting people away from it, but it's not really the solution here. So I ended up working, then after I left Uber, I saw this new innovation come down the pipe. These things, these scooters. Now, has anybody here taken a scooter before? Put your hand up. Oh, yeah, sweet. Okay, yeah, you're a cool audience. Okay, sweet. So turns out, you didn't know it, probably, but you're actually helping with climate change, especially if you're shifting from using cars to using scooters for a lot of your transport. On a per kilometre basis, they can be about anywhere from sort of 10 to 100 times less emitting on a per kilometre basis. And in terms of refueling them, especially if you own them, you can refuel them incredibly cheaply. And if we go back to that Buckminster Fuller quote, saying, how do you want to build a new solution that makes, the existing reality obsolete. There was a nugget of an idea in there of saying, we can build a solution that means that people don't need to own their cars because you give them something that's just like 10 or 100 times better, and it's probably more fun. So that idea, what we ended up doing, and this is myself and a couple of mates, we built a company that covers this space, and we ended up investing in a lot of different solutions because it's this idea, if we have lightweight electric vehicles, we can actually reduce our emissions simply by selling something into the market that's just better. People want to use it. They find it more fun. It gets you around a city in a more efficient way. So obviously, yes, we start with scooters, but you go into these larger vehicles, and we've kind of classified everything up to 500 kgs as what we call micro-mobility. And yeah, there are a couple of problems with them. People always say, oh, look, I don't want to take an e-bike because I'll get wet because I live in Wellington and it rains all the time. But actually, there are solutions that are coming down the pipe that use all of these amazing innovations that we've seen in the space of battery reduction, the cost of batteries that are coming down, new motors that are coming out that are really powerful. And so vehicles like this, the Nimbus, they're tilting. They'll go through, you can lane split down the middle of a big traffic jam with them. They look a bit weird, but they're kind of cool, kind of maybe you'd be cool if you rode in one, I would hope. But I work with them, and I've invested in them they're based in the States, but we work from all over the world to help try and make this a reality. And the reason is, we reckon that these will be rentable on the street like a Lime scooter for $4 an hour. And if you can get one for $4 an hour, you start going like, well, if I can kind of put a kind of solution together between Uber, one of these, a Mevo, a scooter, and taking the bus or taking the train, then maybe I don't need to own a car and I can get onto these really nice non-polluting solutions. So we're working on that. Hopefully they'll be coming to fruition in the next couple of years. But the kind of core idea that we have for micromobility is that when you're going to take a trip, you'll pick the vehicle that's the right size. So if you're going to take a small trip, and most of our trips are small trips, you'll pick a scooter or something that's small, and you'll use the thing that makes the most sense for that trip. And then if you're going to go on a big long trip, so you're going up to, from Wellington to go see my family back in Rotorua, you'll take a car, because that would be preposterous to take a scooter. And in the middle, somewhere, you'll get to take an e-bike. And so really kind of the core concept that we have is that we think the future will end up looking far more like scooters than it will electric cars. And that is my small little contribution. Yes.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you so much. Okay, so I heard something in your kōrero there which maybe wasn't what you intended to be the message, but I heard something about, we are all born ready. You're just going with it. With that kind of like front forward creative thinking at each step you've encountered something and you've like creatively engaged with it and moved through it. The second thing that I heard was it's kind of okay to fail. You didn't say that word, but we all get to the point where we're like, oh, this is not working for me. And that's okay. That's part of it too, right? And then you just work with it, and I think we can all relate to that. We're going to have a lot of experiments as we go along with trying to build these solutions, and just keep going with your instinct, listen to your tipuna, and find the way to keep moving forward.
Totally.
Kia ora. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's hear. Right. Next speaker, you're up.
Oh, just going to make sure that my
Limbering
t-shirt
up here.
is fully in view. It's a bit cold up here, so I might have to come back and suit up. All right, so I'm going to, as quickly as possible, tell you about me, my journey, and then I'll try and spend most of the time on EECA. So, a little bit about me, and I'm telling you this because I'm aware that a lot of the audience are in the demographic where you're thinking about future career choices, so this might resonate with some people. I'm from Invercargill, very modest family, went to Otago University, like more people than I realised when I came to Festival of the Future. I was on OUSA, the Students' Association, so that seems to be a real theme that comes through. And people who get involved with students' associations seem to be people who are really passionate about making the world a better place. So I urge that and really enjoy my journey through that. I became an environmental lawyer, and I was an environmental and climate change lawyer for 10 to 15 years. Some of the highlights from that were working in Australia, helping one of the oil company clean up their contamination, make really good choices from the inside. Helped some other companies build some really decent wind farms across Australia. Helped roll out some solar tariff contracts that really started the solar revolution in Australia. And then I came back to New Zealand, and I thought, well, this has been really great working as an environmental lawyer, trying to persuade people to do the right thing, trying to persuade the decision makers to do the right thing. But what I actually want to be is the decision maker making that decision. Then I can have more control and make more impact into making the world a better place. So I went in-house, went to work at Transpower New Zealand's transmission owner. I was head of customers there for a while. Did some other really cool stuff there. Helped Transpower engage more with its consumer base, with the people in New Zealand, so that what the decisions that it made really reflected what the consumers needed looking forward into the future, led by an incredible CE there, actually. And then I made a move into central government, and I helped lead the Provincial Growth Fund for a couple of years. I don't know if anyone out in the regions has been touched by Provincial Growth Fund projects, but that's one of the best things I've ever done in my career. Really passionate work where it was easy to go to work every day because you knew that you were making a difference, even what you did in that 8-hour period. So from there I went to EECA. I've been at EECA for about 5 months, and look, I'd say the same thing. It's been great coming back to the energy industry, but I'm still driven by that kaupapa and the commitment to make a difference, make sure that when I get up in the morning, what I go and do makes, improves the world, touches on people's everyday lives, and just takes us forward. Okay, so a little bit about EECA, well, a lot about EECA. EECA's vision is to make sure that New Zealand has a sustainable energy system that supports the well-being and the prosperity of our current generation and our future generations. The reason that we focus on energy is that when you look at the decarbonisation challenge, around about 42% of New Zealand's emissions come from energy. About 20% of that comes from transport, and about 9% of that comes from industry, especially what they call process heat, which is, when you think about a process, it might be involved in manufacturing that needs heat in order to be successful. A lot of that at the moment comes from coal. You would be really surprised. So EECA is really focusing hard and fast on those two areas, in particular transport and industry. We work with everyone from government, the biggest users, right down to individuals. And we know that there are huge opportunities, especially in those two areas, to make significant carbon costs. So how we measure our progress is in taking carbon out of the atmosphere, not literally taking it out, but making sure it doesn't get there. So it's real, it's not notional, it's not fantasy, it's real. It's less carbon going into the atmosphere, and we're really proud of what we've achieved so far. The other thing we measure ourselves on is making a real difference to influencing the hearts and minds of New Zealanders so that we can create a groundswell for more change, because we need massive change now. We absolutely need it. Although we are non-partisan when we're government officials, we know that the government really wants to make massive change, and so the community has a big role in making that normalised, expected, easier for them to do. All right, so EECA has some really powerful levers. We've got this thing called the GIDI, or the Government Investment in Decarbonising Industry Fund, and this is focused on motivating big businesses to make change. There's some amazing things happening which you probably won't be aware of. I'll give you a couple of examples. Woolworks is wool scourer based in Washdyke, Timaru, and they wash wool before it's processed. They used to use coal to heat the water to do this, but we co-funded a project to replace their coal boilers with high temperature heat pumps. That sounds boring, doesn't it? But what it's meant is, by doing that, we have effectively decarbonised the entire industry with this project. So if you want clean wool now, it's been decarbonised. That is unfriggin' believable. What that means, it's the equivalent of taking 3,000 cars off the road. I'll give you another example. So for those of you who I was going to give you an example about chips actually, because we've done some amazing decarbonisation work in the hot chips area. But this one's about tomatoes, but healthier. So JSU's is one of the largest Fiji growers in the country. They've got 12 hectares of glass houses, and they've got 220 hectares outside. So we work with them to reduce their energy use hugely. We installed thermal screens in the glass houses to reduce the need for heating or cooling. So that's a very practical, easy to imagine solution. These used to be coal powered, but you didn't know that. So that already brought the emissions down, but now they're switching their coal boilers for biogas, which will make their emissions basically nothing. That's amazing. Emission-free tomatoes. And when I visited them, I also found that I could stop washing my tomatoes, which was another bonus. They're just grown so cleanly and well. Our GIDI fund has 3 rounds. Round 1, which happened in around about May, in itself took 3 million tonnes of CO2 out of the atmosphere, or prevented it going in over the lifetime of those projects. That is amazing. So what that means, if you've heard about the Climate Change Commission's budgets for New Zealand going forward, that's nearly 10% of the whole budget for the first period just by that 1 round of our GIDI fund, and there's 3 more rounds to go. Progress is being made. So all those people who are like that, You know, I'm sure you can put one up at least. All right, I'm going to quickly run through some other things. There's a lot I can tell you about some good things happening. We've got the Low Emissions Transport Fund, and the reason that we've got this is because one of the biggest challenges, there is the tech to decarbonise, by the way. The technology exists. It's just about creating the uptake for that. So one of the big challenges for the new tech is bridging the divide between the early days when uptake's still risky, and I'm sure our last speaker knows all about this. Probably would have loved some government funding, maybe even got some. So this often requires government intervention so that we can get that tech to the point where it's economically feasible and where it's proven. So that's the role that we play in the Low Emissions Transport Fund. For example, we co-funded the first electric buses in the country. They've been on the road for a few years, and diesel buses are now on the way out. That is, you know, that's almost tick done. Amazing. We've co-funded over 1,000 EV chargers in order to support EV update, and there is now an EV on around about every 75 kilometres of state highway across New Zealand. Really hoping I get some questions later about transport, total cost of ownership, all the things that are worrying you about going EV. We've got a mostly invisible regulatory role. We ensure that appliances coming into New Zealand meet emissions standard. That sounds so boring, doesn't it? But over the past 2 decades, our regulations have saved New Zealanders more than the electricities that all New Zealand houses use in 1 year. So it's actually quite a big deal, but it's invisible. Last thing that I want to really cover is Genless, and we've got an amazing stall out in the expo with some cool t-shirts. There's a tattoo wall where we are encouraging you to decide what your climate change commitment's going to be, and then pick a tattoo that demonstrates your commitment to that. So Genless is our platform to give people trusted advice on the decarbonisation journey, because we know that Kiwis overwhelmingly want to do something about climate change, but the evidence that we commission constantly and that we have shows that a lot of people just don't know where to start. Genless is also not about making climate action an individual responsibility, it's about collective responsibility. It's about showing you the power of doing it together, and it's really about demonstrating what's possible. So a lot of facts on our Genless website, and a lot of case studies that those big businesses use as well to see what they could do. All right, tech exists. It's all about motivating change. We need massive change now, and we need you for a few things. We need you to create the groundswell for that change. We also need the resources to make it happen. So people out there who are thinking about careers, we desperately need more engineers, scientists, builders, maintenance, tech, clean tech, service people, consultants. We need people with those practical skills. And we also need you to not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. So you can't just go to a climate change march and think that's your job done. If you're willing to participate in a climate change march, we need you to walk to a supermarket and not drive there. We need you to think about your consumer choices and not just buy the cheapest, cleanest. So my lasting message from here today would be walk the walk. If you don't know what to do, have a look at Genless and just know the power of your individual leadership in this challenge ahead.
Kia ora. Awesome, thank you so much. So, I'll be honest, how many other people in here, when you were talking about working at EECA, was thinking about a big fish somewhere? So now I'm looking at it, it's like EECA, which stands for the
Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority.
Yes, and the sponsors for this corridor, so thank you so much. And I heard two things wrapped up in what you were saying. The first one, I was thinking, that was awesome. I was like, oh, choice. So you can actually get paid to do climate solution work now, and you mentioned pretty much every ministry here in Wellington. And the second thing I was thinking of was, looks like climate change solutions is kind of a growth industry, because you can kind of move out into lots of unexpected spaces and find yourself working on climate solutions, anything from growing tomatoes to all different types of more technical work and more generalist work. So that's given me some hope, and I'm seeing some awesome partai coming through. Some of these questions we're going to circle back round to, so keep them coming. But for now, let's hear from you, Mary, please.
I'm going to stay here.
Woo!
Hi, I'm going to stay. Can everyone hear me? Cool. Kia ora whānau. Nisa Bulivanaka, I just want to remind you all that Fiji beat New Zealand in the sevens at the Olympics. But in saying that, I really want to firstly acknowledge mana whenua te awa and all our Indigenous communities on the tangata whenua across the motu and around the world who today continue to fight for their whenua, their land, their reo, in solidarity always. I also want to acknowledge our family in Fiji and our friends in Fiji who are currently dealing with two crises, a health crisis and a climate crisis. So if you are joining us online, I don't know what the camera is, but our hearts and our prayers are with you, family. I also want to kind of remind everyone and acknowledge that tomorrow is the Dawn Raids apology for our Pacific communities. And I think it's important to kind of recognize that, you know, a lot of our families are probably carrying conflicting emotions around that. On one hand, obviously, there's a lot of joy and happiness that there is an apology, and then obviously sadness and anger that it happened in the first place, and frustration that there's actually no compensation. But anyways, but koaio o aia'u, I'm marrying a whamaliatoa sapati Moeono-Kolio. I'm Samoan, I'm a proud daughter of the Pacific. I hail from the villages of Whalefa and Tiovea on my dad's side, and Leawa and Malie on my mum's side. I was kind of like reflecting a lot throughout the week around like what I wanted to share with you and how I wanted to answer like what climate leadership needs to look like. But I kind of trust that what climate leadership needs to look like is in this room, and you have the answers more than you realize. The Pacific Climate Warriors, which is my family, we're actually a network of Pacific climate activists across the world. I think we have 17 teams across 21 countries. And we were actually born out of a need to challenge the narrative of climate change that Pacific Islanders and our Pacific Islands were victims of climate change and that we were weak and needing help. When in actual fact, we are the climate leaders that people are looking to, and that Indigenous communities, Pacific communities, Māori communities, we are the OG conservationists. We are the OG environmentalists. So really kind of taking that message of we are not drowning, we are fighting, and we have been fighting for a very long time. And so I really want to center at the beginning of my sharing is that Pacific communities have been and continue to show what climate leadership looks like. So for example, I hope you know, but does anyone know what country is first to go solar powered? Tokelau. Right, so this tiny island is the first country in the world to have gone 100% solar powered. A lot of people also don't realize that the 1.5 that is now in the Paris Agreement was driven by Marshallese youth who started the 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign. I also want to acknowledge, and she hates it when I do this, I can already see her eyes rolling. But, you know, before there was a Greta, and, you know, sis, she's great. and what she's been able to do and how she's been able to progress the conversation around climate change is awesome. But brown, Black, Indigenous communities have been doing this for a long time. And my sister, who's rolling her eyes at me right now, Brianna Fruin, I hope you know that name. If you don't know it now, she's been doing this mahi since she was 11 years old, more than a decade, more than half of her life. And so I think I just want to share that and center that so much work has happened in the climate movement, but policy and decision makers and media don't pick it up. I want to share a little bit of a reflection around the climate strikes. I went to a climate strike. But in 2019, alongside our sis Sophie, the Pacific Climate Warriors actually co-hosted the Wellington strike. Not many people know that because Balangi media, but that was such a powerful moment for us, for our young people. And I do this work for free. I actually work in the education sector, and as someone who's dedicated my life to the empowerment of Pacific young people and fighting for equitable education, because Indigenous knowledge is science. Just wanted to share that. I don't want our Pacific young people, our Māori young people, to ever feel like they have to leave themselves at the door before you enter a classroom, and unfortunately that's a reality. So when we talk about strikes, I kind of want to share that it's really not something to aspire to or something to look forward to. It was something that we really had to toy over and think about. And my reflection is that to this day, I have really conflicting emotions about that strike, because on one hand, it was so heartwarming to see our Pacific young people in all of their glory at the front of the march, centering those who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. It was also so heartwarming to see the New Zealand that we're trying to fight for, that all Kiwis, doesn't matter where you are from, who are you from, my English guys, it's okay. But that was an example of the future that we're all working towards. However, on the other hand, it was also heartbreaking at the same time, because I knew what going to a strike meant for a lot of our communities. And for a lot of our Pacific whānau who work low-income jobs, imagine having to consider, do I stand with my young person at this strike, or do I go to work and get a day's wage to put food on the table? That's the kind of things that go through our mind. Also, our young people having to give up a day of learning. Like, that's a big thing. Education is a privilege, and our young people know that. So when you have people like Judith Collins, sorry if this your auntie, sorry. But when you have people like Judith Collins, who is a leader in our country, saying, they'll grow out of climate activism, that really pisses me off, because so much sacrifice has gone into this movement, and that a lot of our communities, a lot of our young people have really had to toy over, do I represent, do I fight, or do I go get an education, or do I go get some money for food on the table? And what particularly upsets me about that kind of thinking is that that's actually indicative of our decision-making spaces. So a lot of our decision-making spaces, and I know that we have a lot of private activists in this space, we always kind of have young people come in at the end of the process when the consultation is done, or in consultation when a recommendation's already done. That's not cool. And so, so when we're talking about decision-making processes or solutions development, reflect on your process. At what point do you include mana whenua? At what point do you include youth voices? At what point do you include Pacific communities? At what point do you have frontline communities in your process? If it's at consultation, then that's probably at the end, and you probably almost have the recommendations already sussed. So just think about that, as our future leaders, as if there are any leaders in the room in decision-making spaces right now, really reflect on your processes. I also wanted to share that one of the things that has kind of really stuck in my mind from the strikes, and I don't want it to be lost on you, is that we had a Tokelauan preschool from Porirua join the strikes. And obviously, media thinks that's lovely, that's cute, but imagine, is that what it takes? Does it take our preschoolers having to stand outside our decision makers' doors to convince them that this is actually an emergency? So I really don't want people to lose sight of why we're doing this. It's not for fun. Some facts, and I hope people know this, but the Pacific actually collectively contributes less than 0.5% to total global emissions. So imagine being the smallest contributor to a problem, but you have the most to lose, and you have the most to lose immediately. So when we talk about climate change, it's not this distant thing that we're trying to avoid. It's here, it's now, and our communities and our families in the islands are feeling it today. And what's the English word? I was thinking a lot about whether I should, kind of paint the picture of what the destruction feels like in the Pacific, but I don't want to paint that narrative because our communities are resilient. And if you want to see what climate change looks like, there's pictures outside. There's a wall of photos. So I really wanted to kind of end, if you understand the magnitude of the injustice that Pacific communities and a lot of Indigenous communities across the world have contributed least to this problem, but have the most to lose and the most to lose immediately, then you will act with the urgency that is required to address it. So when New Zealand talks about being a Pacific nation, we need to act on that. And New Zealand and our leaders can no longer choose when it's convenient that they are a Pacific country and choose when we're Pacific neighbors. Because we are not your neighbors, we are your family. And so you need to act as if we are family. So, yeah.
Kia ora, that was so awesome, thank you. And there were a couple of things wrapped up in there that I put into my kete to help inform me move forward. The first one, I was just thinking activism is life. Life is activism. Wrapped up in politics. We can't escape the political. And maybe the first thing to do for every one of us at every step in our journey through these climate solutions is to check our privilege, to understand our own privilege, to understand that privilege is contextual, relative, in other group settings, community settings, and maybe leading to the second thing I was reflecting on listening to you, this question of co-design, partnership. That consultation word has got to go, and you put it so beautifully about the sequence and the idea of co-design, which at least coming from my understanding with a Te Tiriti framework, that is actually mandated and we've all committed to that and we all have that as part of our national collective commitments to each other. So thank you for that. Awesome. Cool, okay, last but not least, let's take it away.
My why is that by the end of my life, I want to be able to say that I did absolutely everything in my power and use my voice to its full potential to stand up for our planet, which in so many spaces and places does not have a voice. Pretty much everything that I do now is founded off that simple principle, that simple why. So if you're sitting in this room and you're wondering what your why is, you're wondering what your connection to the issue of climate change is, you're wondering how you fit into the solutions, how you fit into this collective vision of climate justice, I encourage you to think about that. my why, I found my why when I was 12-ish years old, and I want to recognise, again, people who found their connection to climate change in a more real way than I did at that age, and still continue to fight based off of that real lived experience. So to Brianna, to the Warriors, to the Pacific Climate Warriors, to anyone from Te Ara Whatu in the room, For the Culture, beautiful sis Mary, all of you, I want to acknowledge that my story is kind of like a little, I don't know, subtitle at the bottom of that story, and it's connected in some way, but I'll explain it. So when I was around 12 years old, I have this vivid memory sitting down at my dining room table with my mum and my dad, and they had just got this letter in the mail, and so they were reading this letter, and the story will make sense soon, but they were reading this letter, and they were looking at each other pretty concerned. And I, being the curious 12-year-old that I was, and the curious person that I still try to be, I asked them what this letter was all about. And essentially, I live in Paikakiriki, small seaside village of around 1,700 people, real small community, but super whānau-like vibe. And so mum told me, she was like, look, Sophie, we live right by the ocean, right? Like the ocean is essentially our front garden, but not in the kind of way that right now it is for those in the Pacific and for our Pacific Island whānau. But that's when I started to understand climate change. I started to understand the reality of climate change and the impact that it is going to have on my whānau, but then further finding out the impact that it's already having on people. Because that was me in that moment, being 12 years old, feeling terrified about the impact it was going to have, this letter said it was going to have on my whānau's whare in 50 years' time. But then I found out the impact that it's already having on whānau now. And that's when I realised that what Miriama Kamo said, you feel the fear, but you do this stuff anyway. And that's kind of through having that curiosity and through connecting to my why and realising that our planet, our sea level, our nature, we can listen to that in ways that will hopefully encourage and connect us to nature and encourage us to then speak up for it. But actually, it can't speak up for itself in the ways that we have the power to speak up and actually encourage and influence other people to make a difference. And so that's when I realised, okay, who are the people who I need to sit down with and put this question to them? What are they doing to protect my home, our home? What are they doing to protect our whānau's home in the Pacific? And so that's when, at 12 years old, I was a year 8 at Paikakiriki Primary School, I invited my local member of parliament at the time to speak to my class. And so I sat him down, similar to how we're sitting now, and put that question quite simply to him. I said, look, what are you doing to protect our collective home? What are you doing to take action on the climate crisis? What does that look like in your role, sir, as an MP? Fully expecting him to say, I recognise it's an emergency, I recognise I have the power and the responsibility to do something. But I was met with the reply, something along the lines of, well, you'd be better off asking our climate change minister. And simply, I said that that's not good enough, because we all know, being citizens of this collective home, this planet that we share, we each have a responsibility to raise our voices, but also to take those actions that we can take in our own lives through ensuring that the system also is accessible for us to do that, because for a lot of people at the moment, there are still challenges and barriers in the way of that. So feeling that fear and knowing that there are so many people who feel a greater level of fear than I did. But understanding that if there was a space for people who feel fearful or feel this kind of anxiety about the kind of future we might be inheriting, or feel like we have no power to make a difference, how do we bring those people together to share experience, to share that common understanding of what it feels like to be a young person in this day and age where we don't really know what our future is going to look like, and really right now it does hang in that balance, because this moment in time is so incredibly crucial. That's kind of when School Strike for Climate was born. Back in 2019, none of us had really any idea what we were doing. We just thought there needed to be a space and a place to draw together those fears that people were feeling, but also that hope to create something better and to be a part of a movement where the planet could have its voice heard, but also that we as young people could have our voices heard too. And so School Strike for Climate grew from being myself and a few other friends just from my high school to being roughly 40 people over the course of 2 weeks. And the youngest member of School Strike for Climate, 8 years old, We had a 10-year-old boy involved with School Strike for Climate down in Invercargill, and he knocked on the doors of high schools, helped to mobilise entire high schools at 10 years old, and that all contributed to, alongside the incredible mahi of Pacific Climate Warriors and others who we co-hosted with, to that turnout of 170,000 people in September. Now that's 3.5% of New Zealand's entire population. We had barely any resource. We didn't have much of a clue of what we were doing, but we knew why we were doing it. We knew why it was important, and we knew the importance of this moment in time right now. Because quite literally, we have this window of time now, roughly 8.5 years, to halve our emissions. Before 2030, we have to halve our emissions pretty much to be in with a chance of staying below 1.5 degrees of global warming. That's not long. And those of us alive at this very moment in time on this planet that we share, if we don't do that, no one will even have the chance to take that kind of action that our planet so desperately needs. And if that doesn't feel like a massive responsibility to all of you, like I encourage you to kind of let that sit with you. Because if we do let this window of time pass by, this 8.5 years, what kind of ancestors will we have been to those that follow? When our grandchildren sit us down and they ask us these questions, how are we going to respond? Oh yeah, we knew it was coming, we knew we had this window of time, we knew it was an emergency, we knew it was a crisis, but we still sat here and talked. And frankly, we have these kōrero, we have these discussions, and yes, they're so vital. But all of you are in this room because you recognise that climate change is important. You recognise that we need to take action. You recognise that you need to continue to speak for our planet and to speak for the solutions that our planet needs. So let's put those solutions into action. And that's kind of when running for council came about, partly, but it's a weird story. I kind of thought, well, okay, in what spaces am I engaging with in the School Strike for Climate, my School Strike for Climate capacity, where one, there aren't any or many young people, two, where's the voice and the urgency around action on climate change? We don't actually need that much resource. We don't actually need to have that much understanding of this whole system. We just need to have a why, a passion, a drive, and a team. And a team, I'd like to come back to that point, is so crucially important. My campaign to get me elected to council was run by a whole group of young people from Kapiti, none of whom could vote for me. They were either too young or didn't live in the ward that I was running in. We ran the campaign on fundraisers. We fundraised roughly $6,000 from doing clothing swaps, bake sales, fundraising gigs, and we managed to pull it off. And we won by more votes than both other candidates had combined. And so again, the story, but it just proves what's possible. And so often I feel like with climate solutions, there are so many reasons put forward to us about why things aren't possible. There are so many kind of doubts in our own heads, or there are so many it's just easier to come up with reasons why things aren't possible. But literally, things just have to start moving. If you've got an idea, just take that first step. Just start. That's how School Strike for Climate started. That's how I ran for council, and that's how the campaign worked. We just started and we kept on rolling and being persistent because we knew why we were doing it. And so now in council, I'm starting to see how important integration of climate change across, within, through everything that council does is so important. Things like housing, how we design our towns and communities so we don't even need scooters, cars, trains, buses. We can walk everywhere. We live in community, we live alongside whānau, we live in spaces that are empowered and that encourage us to make differences, ones where we feel valued and where we know that our difference is valued and that are diverse and where there are intergenerational kind of aspects to those as well. And that's kind of the last thing, I guess, that I would like to leave you all with in this little part of the kōrero is just that importance of intergenerational understanding and solidarity. And Mary and I were having a brief kōrero about this before, but it's so important that we learn from our past mistakes, that we look backwards as we're walking forwards, and that we consider how the environment has been in balance with humans in the past. It's not a new concept, and it's entirely possible. We cannot kind of negate these things and push them away because we think that vision, that ideal vision, isn't possible, because I swear anything is possible if you have that reason why and you just start and you just believe it fully yourself and you're able to be around a team of people who also believe it as well. So if we're going to be the best possible ancestors, and I know and I'm sure that all of you in this room hopefully just really want to be able to be that for generations that follow us and to be able to truly stand and be confident that you have done that. We just have to harness these next 8.5 years. Yes, it will be challenging. Yes, there'll be difficult conversations to be had. Yes, it might cost a bit of money. Yes, we might have to challenge our own understandings and unlearn and relearn and, just be in dialogue but ultimately start acting. This moment in time is so crucially important. So if not now, then when? If not us, then who? We just got to get down to the mahi. Yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Oh, ngā mihi nui there, Sophie. We're so charged up, ready to go right now. Everybody to the beehive. Let's go marching. Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, I really felt your energy through that, and there were a couple of things that were running through my mind. I was thinking about power in numbers, and throughout your kōrero, you're talking about connecting with people, finding your wānau, and basically that was your the wind beneath your wings. You're connecting across all these communities. And then I was thinking too about how knowledge is power, and the self-knowledge that you mentioned right at the start. Refreshing yourself, going back to knowing you and what your unique motivation is and the things that make you most happy. It sounds like you were in your political space most happy. Think about what your happy place is within life in general, what motivates you, and how the movement will benefit from that special gift that we all, each of us uniquely have. So thank you for that, guys. That was all super inspiring. And I feel like we're really ready to answer some of these awesome questions that you guys have been sharing with us. We've got them presented in front of us here. One that I thought I might kick us off with is coming back to a little bit of audience participation. So everyone get your arms ready. I want to answer the question about climate anxiety with a little exercise. So everyone do what I do. Are you ready? Oh, that was terrible. Get your hands nice and warm, get your hands nice and warm. This is going to help us understand something about climate anxiety, and put it on your heart. And take a deep breath in. You feel that warmth in your hands going into your heart there. Breathe nice and deep, straight down into Papatua Nuku. Feel that awesome connection with the earth there. And let your breath out and send it right up to Ranginui, up in the sky, and you feel that connection. You're this wonderful creation cradled between heaven and earth, and let that rest deep within your wairua. Think about all the amazing ancestors that have got you here, all that survival through millennia and millennia. So that is our deep inspiration. We can do this, people. Yes, it's going to be potentially stressful. Yes, we're going to have anxiety, but we can feel that deep in our spirit, the fact that we've all got this together. Now, that might seem a little bit kooky, but as a little technique from a war crimes investigator who's been in a few little tricky situations that might have involved mortars and different rockets and bombs, an awesome technique if you're starting to feel a bit overwhelmed, so let's be real, it is quite overwhelming. Find some way to come back to your senses. It could be sound, it could be touch, it could be smell as you're breathing in. If you're getting that climate anxiety, they're starting to call it PTSD, as in pre-traumatic stress disorder these days. So if you're getting that anxiety, embrace it, it's real. There's ways through it. first get your, come back home to your body, feel connected, take care of yourself. And as we've seen, there's all these different constructive avenues that we can keep going back into in our daily life. But just so long as we don't forget that we have the right to be happy and enjoy this life and embrace that with our positive attitudes moving into these solutions. But it is tough. So maybe we can start with that question, one of the tricky ones. I'd be really curious to hear, how do you guys cope with some of that like personal challenge? And I want to tie it to the top question that came through, which is a really tricky one, which is, so the precise question is, we heard about how plastics were first viewed as a game changer and now plastic is the problem. We have some potential game changers for addressing climate change, like electric batteries. Could they be part of the solution, part of the problem moving forward? So I think those two questions go well together, because sometimes you can get so caught up in anxieties that even potential solutions themselves could be part of the problem, and that just invokes more anxieties. So I thought I'd see if you guys had any experience with either finding out that a solution was actually a problem and how we manage that, or maybe specifically about batteries. And then just in terms of you personally, how do you deal with those fears and anxieties that come forward? Does anyone want to jump in? I feel like it's a personal question, so I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Happy to take the batteries.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk to the... Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to the anxiety, because that one... I suffered from anxiety from 13, and it was pretty... Well, I didn't realise I had anxiety. That was kind of the weird thing. I was just perennially feeling like everything was... I had a lot of dread about everything, because I spent a lot of time reading about climate change when I was at university, and it kind of feels like a lot of the world hadn't woken up to, oh God, guys, we've got a pretty serious problem here. And the thing that kind of has provided me with a little bit of hope, one, realizing, yes, I have a responsibility, but also the world is not on my shoulders for everything. And second is going and looking for the solutions, because I'm so excited. I think this is the biggest opportunity of our lifetime in terms of changing the systems that we've had that haven't served us in many ways. Like, they've served us, yes, but a lot of the solutions are going to be far better off for so many more people. And that gives me hope. And so focusing on that stuff has been really helpful for me.
Awesome. How about you, Mary? Sorry.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one for me, because I feel like for a lot of our Pacific young people, especially those of us from the islands, losing hope is almost not an option because of the time frame that we have to save our homes. We kind of don't have that luxury to feel anxious and grief. And I know that sounds horrible, because of course we need to look after our mental health and our well-being. But I guess my offering is that I hope you can find hope and be filled with hope when you look at the strength and the resilience of Pacific young people, and our Pacific young people in the islands and our Pacific communities who continue to rebuild almost immediately. Like, they're just in this constant state of rebuilding because of the consistent impacts of climate change. But we get up the next day, we start building literally straight after like a cyclone. Sometimes our kids are swimming in questionable water after flooding. But that's kind of the spirit in which our people move. We move with a lot of joy and with a lot of hope. So I know that this crisis seems really big, but those who are on the front lines almost don't have the luxury of losing hope because of the time frame that we have. So I feel like, take that away, but also if you need to step back, reflect on where you are and what you can give to the movement, then do that. I think a lot of our young people particularly feel so driven to give all of what they are all the time to social justice movements, whether it's a climate movement or anti-racism movements. But that's not helpful to the wider movement. So you know when you need to step back. And it sounds kind of logical, like it seems like an obvious answer, but that would be my encouragement. no, be comfortable with saying no and saying like, hold on, I want to step back for 5 minutes or 5 weeks or 5 months, and I'll come back when I can actually give what I need to give.
Kia ora. I'm just appreciating that because I just had a bit of a funk with all the news recently globally about the extreme climate events. But Nicki, it sounded like you had some ideas around electric batteries.
Yeah, I can probably give some specific answers to that question, but I might just talk about hope a little bit. So you made a comment I thought was really important, and it is that individuals do not have the world on their shoulders. And what I would like to encourage individuals to do is to take individual actions that you can feel proud of. People who are in terrible situations will often say that hope is freedom. So I think hope should be the absolute last thing that we give up. We have to ensure that we have hope. I'm really hopeful for the human race. The technology is getting better and better all the time, and I'll give an electric batteries example on that. But one thing I'd like to say is that you definitely do not have the world on your shoulders having to do it all yourself. So every single person in here will be either a taxpayer or you'll have whānau who are taxpayers, and that means that you're contributing financially to the government taking action, and the government absolutely is taking action. And again, I say that in a very non-partisan way, impartial in accordance with my public official duties and oaths. For example, there's a booth in the expo which is talking about coal boilers in schools. So EECA is taking coal boilers out of, I don't know if it's all schools, but it's as many schools as possible. It's a huge number of schools. We're doing 90 in this year alone. So there's so much actually happening. I think you can have hope about the real things that are taking effect. And I don't say that to sing EECA's praises. I say that to give you hope that you are contributing as a taxpayer to real things happening. In terms of battery, I think this is something that makes people worry quite a lot, whether EVs are the green choice that they're branded to be. What I'd like to say is that the technology on batteries is just getting better all the time. So yes, there were concerns about batteries when this technology was starting off, but we've moved a long way. So batteries will last between 10 and 20 years now. When they get to the end of life, they can be recharged, repurposed, reused. They can be reused for things that aren't even transport related. They can be reused for domestic solar applications. A few government agencies are part of a battery industry group, which is looking at ways to ensure that they are sustainable through the whole of the supply chain. And the companies that are involved in even the minerals extraction part at the start of the process are making huge steps in not just the environmental aspects of that, but the human rights aspects of that as well. So there's a lot of improvement happening here really quickly. And things that are identified as challenges are very real, but the solutions are equally real.
Awesome. Yeah, that takes me back to another thing that we've had about knowledge is power, and we can investigate all these very specific pathways that we have in New Zealand to solutions, be it electric batteries or where we get our tomatoes. Would you like to chime in there, Sophie, either on those or any of these questions that are coming through? And we've got about 10 minutes left, so maybe if we hear from you and then we can circle back to some concluding reflections.
Yeah, sure. I'll briefly speak on is that working? Yeah, I'll briefly speak on the climate anxiety kind of question, because I think that's just a really natural feeling anyway. Like, I definitely go through massive cycles and waves of feeling that myself. Some days you wake up wondering, whether that responsibility you feel, but also the weight of the incredible opportunity that is in front of us, like whether what I'm doing actually is able to have any contribution to that solution. But I think holding that hope and providing people access to that hope through our collective solution and conversation is so, so important. So please know that it's completely natural to have bouts of climate anxiety. We all do, even if we're a part of the solutions, or even if we're, might be up the front here kind of having this kōrero with you all and sharing our thoughts and experiences with you all. Please know that it's still, it never goes away, and it's completely natural, because it is quite literally our whole collective home that is at stake. But also, as was mentioned, there's an opportunity that we have right now to transform our entire collective home so that we're passing on a better one to following generations. So that opportunity, please, alongside that responsibility that we have right now to transform our collective home to one that's zero carbon, and one where we're reducing our agricultural emissions, and one where we're really laying down the groundwork for, a beautiful world, a more sustainable world, a more just and equitable world. Please know that, we hold those responsibilities alongside our opportunities to make differences, and that climate anxiety is extremely natural. And if you have a tribe to talk with about it, if you have a team, just share your experiences, talk about it. Like we all feel it, so don't at all feel like you're alone in that. Just one other question here: how to get started with bringing climate change action into your schools and School Strike for Climate? Again, I would just say get started. If you've got an idea, just have kōrero with people, share your idea. We had this young woman who's involved with School Strike for Climate. At 12 years old, she started a global group in her school down in Christchurch, where she would bring together her peers, and they would just have conversations about how they were feeling about climate change, solution-focused ideas that they had, different conversations they were wanting to have with councils. Like, anyone can do this kind of stuff. You don't have to be a certain type of person. You don't have to be a certain age. You don't have to have credentials. I haven't studied. You don't have to, all of those things don't necessarily matter. And the earth will respect and, appreciate our contributions no matter what. So just know that, through whatever you're able to do, in whatever space, if you're at school, if you're at mahi, just remember that we are supposed to be being good ancestors and good kaitiaki of this planet, but sometimes it's so easy to forget that when we're kind of wrapped kind of in all these systems, and business as usual is pretty easy. It's just easy to go day by day and continue doing things as we always have. So just be conscious about, starting things. If you've got an idea, if you've got some change that you want to see, be that change, or speak with people and help to create that change, because you can totally do it, and just back your voice and know that you have the power to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. And what's giving me heaps of hope is just seeing the level of questions that we're getting through here, for which we don't have enough time, but I want to shout out the level of detail here is so encouraging. We've got a question on agriculture. We do need to address that. We've got to make some really hard choices as a group, as an individual. We have to almost have a manifesto of every single one of us committing en masse and communicating that en masse to the government, so that they know there's votes there, that we are happy with massive lifestyle changes. Not just agriculture, but we've got transport here. Is electric transport going to help us?
Can I answer that?
We've also got racism. We've got to deal with the fact that so much of the structures that have caused and are perpetuating climate change are deeply racist. They come from this colonial structure of empire and the fossil fuel economy. So all of this together, I just needed to say right at the start, before we go through our wrap-up, that you guys are the callers for hope, because these questions are exactly that type of nuance and demands that we need to be taking out into the streets, connecting with each other. And I apologise that we only have 5 minutes left to wrap up our conversation. But maybe to re-extend the offer, that we all connect, that we all continue the kōrero and discussion. And maybe just to run down the line with a minute of a concluding thought to address all or any of these detailed questions in just 30 seconds.
That's a big question.
Cool.
That's a big question.
So there's an amazing activist in climate tech called Sol Griffith, and he talks about, to that earlier point around wanting to have an exciting future. Did you guys know that the most efficient way to transport a human, beyond walking, beyond taking a bike, anything, is actually flying foxes and roller coasters? And he's like, why aren't we talking about this? Why don't we get creative? I want to live in a world where I get to work on a roller coaster. And I think that there's talking to the future, like, I want to be excited. I want to get up in the morning knowing that I'm working towards a world that is like going to be cool. I want to have kids that get pumped about the world that we're going to have. And, the framing that we have around this is oftentimes it can be really negative, and I totally get it. I've definitely gone through periods where I get really just despair. But there is really creative solutions out there that I think the world is really waking up to it. There's so much money on the table now for really cool and interesting and creative solutions around how we're going to get to a future that's really exciting. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to use my time to answer a question on EVs. And there is a lot of concern in New Zealand at the moment about the coal that is part of New Zealand's national electricity generation mix, which occurs at Huntley. So people are concerned about a decision to buy an EV that ends up being powered by that coal generation. What I'd like to convey to all of you, and for all of you to share with the people that you know, is the real facts, the true life facts on this, which is that an electric vehicle powered using electricity generated 100% from coal, and keep in mind that the coal is switching New Zealand's generation mix by 5%, that's the difference. So even if it was powered 100% by coal, would still have lower emissions than the average internal combustion engine powered by fossil fuels in the New Zealand fleet. So that is the magnitude of the difference. Yes, there is coal-fired electricity now, but this is a short-term issue. Genesis is committed to exiting at some stage. So someone who's making a decision about which car to buy, who goes off and buys the fossil-fueled car, will have that vehicle in the fleet for the next 10 to 15 years, as opposed to the short-term issue of coal, which is due to us having a dry winter, which is not proven to be climate change caused, by the way, it's weather system caused. So 2 key reasons there. It's a myth that really needs busting, so I hope that you can help me with that. One final thing, if you really are feeling despair, then again, leveraging off what you said, go have a look at some amazing YouTube clips on flying cars. Some of the tech that's out there, it will blow your mind. It is so exciting, so engaging. The future is definitely going to be amazing.
Awesome.
Cool. So I would say, just before I answer that very big question, for the Pacific Climate Warriors, key things that we're going to fight for: no more fossil fuel, keep it in the ground. So we no longer want that. And so if New Zealand is going to talk about this being the nuclear-free moment, then our next door neighbour is getting ready to open up Adani coal mine, which means that literally that coal mine is going to produce 20 times Australia's emissions. And that's going to be catastrophic for our islands. So straight off the bat, that's what Pacific Climate Warriors want. Divest your money, so the money that we want no longer invested in the fossil fuel industries, invest that in renewable energy. That is the way of the future. And then finally, to answer this awesome question, and the reason that I share that is because this is something that Pacific Climate Warriors have been pushing, and it's falling on deaf ears. So we can't talk about the nuclear-free moment and try to mirror the bravery that we had back then when we called out the French, if we can't even call out the Aussies. So, just going to get comfortable for this question. When we talk about racism and the climate justice movement, I just want to start off that there is racism in every single social justice movement. So let's just be acutely aware and clear about that. What can allies do to support Pasifika and Indigenous communities? She's going to hate this too, but Sophie honestly has been such a great ally. Talk to the sis. Talk to the sis. She has been an example of what allyship looks like. And the difference to me was that Sophie was willing to listen. Sophie was actually willing to have a conversation, listen to us, and acknowledge that the stories and the knowledge and what we were sharing was actually valuable. when we talk about Indigenous knowledge, like, we also need to recognize that we're not just asking for a place at the table and for you to listen to us. We're asking for you to know that Indigenous knowledge, Pacific knowledges, Māori, Mataranga Māori, is valuable. So therefore, you need to use it to inform the solutions that we're working towards. Shacks. And then, so that's really first and foremost. And I really also want to say, when we're talking Indigenous knowledge, the climate movement is part of this. What's caused the climate crisis is pretty much colonialism and capitalism. Let's just call it what it is. And so when we're talking about like looking back to Indigenous knowledges, we're also from generations, and our parents are from generations who had our reo, our language, our practices, our culture, our identity quite literally beaten out of us, or beaten out of our parents' generation. So now we're on a journey to relearn the Indigenous knowledge. So be very mindful of it, of that when you're going up to a Pacific person and saying, what's the Indigenous solution to A, B, C, D? Okay, we're still on that learning journey as well. So much love. We're not drowning. We're fighting.
Would you like to wrap us up there?
Oh, you're good. Go.
This is an example of allyship, sharing the mic. Okay, so with that, I think we have the perfect recipe for climate solutions. It was know yourself, know the facts, find your family, find your community, and keep hold of that hope. So thank you all. That was awesome. I'm feeling really inspired, and have a great rest of the sessions. Kia ora.
Kia ora.